Welcome, everyone, to this fifth of the webinar series for IVRPA in the year 2024. We have what I consider to be a really interesting presentation today by Uli Futschik and Joergen Geerds, having to do with VR video production, especially oriented towards education. And they have done some incredible work with the Tuskegee Airmen for the World War II Institute. And we're very much looking forward to it. Okay, a few things. One, this presentation will be recorded. It will be available on the IVRPA website to members. So if you are not a member, please join and take advantage of the entire library of member-only recordings, as well as the non-member recordings. Let's see, we have questions. You can place questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I see we have two in the Q&A. Okay. Right. In the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to them as we can. But at the end of the presentation, we'll have an open question and answer session where we can all just converse as we like and about anything. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions about the presentation, but if there's anything else that you would like to talk about with IVRPA or VR, please feel free. And I think that should do it. So I will now turn over the presentation to Uli and Joergen, and enjoy.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Or good evening, depending where you are in the world.
Yep, somewhere on this globe. Start the screen share in a second. So today we want to talk about our documentary about the Tuskegee Airmen. And this has been a 360 VR project that has been in the making for starting about 2022, and it was released in 23.
So I'm Uli Futschik. I did not start out in 360 video or VR or panorama. I actually started out with studying physics and completing my PhD in physics. And then I think around 2012, 13, when Joergen made the first Freedom 360 rig, I went into it full time. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So we have been, so Joergen, yep. Maybe first.
So Uli has been working as director and more as an editor and storyteller. She's been fantastic over the last couple of years, crafting 360 stories for our clients in various ways, and she has really embraced 360 as a storytelling medium. As some of you may remember, I started off in panoramic photography and then went into 360 video because I really believed that this was a storytelling medium that has a future. I studied film back in art school and went into an art direction career in the early 2000s, but then ultimately settled on 360 video.
So with the arrival of fully spherical 360, which Joergen helped bring about, we have been filming since 2012, 2013, 360 video. And since 2015, we're working under the as Koncept VR and have done quite a lot of projects for a variety of clients. As you can see here, I think we talked about World Vision when we were in Ireland in 2019. We talked about
the Met in an earlier, I think in Quebec, we talked about that project a little bit.
And yeah, we have worked for fantastic clients. We have been to rocket launches in the Caribbean, underwater, above. Don't want to say above the
No, we went actually into the stratosphere. So we had a project with the Canadian Space Agency where we launched, where we put on cameras onto a 2-ton platform that went up to 40 kilometers height. So that was very exciting for us. We also worked in entertainment things. We were very happy to be able to produce and direct Hamilton 360 for the Tony Awards, as well as Friend Like Me for Aladdin on Disney on Broadway.
And School of Rock very early on for Andrew Lloyd Webber when they started the musical here in New York and wanted to promote it through 360 video.
Yeah. Which brings us to today's topic. And our client for the last couple of years has been the World War II Foundation.
And the World War II Foundation does documentary videos about World War II, as it says, of course, but from an individual view. So not here is the history, this date was when this happened, but they have done extensive interviews with veterans, and it's their story that these films tell, and they're usually seen on all the PBSs around the US. So I'm pretty sure it has shown up somewhere on your PBS. Everything is available for free because one of the major driving forces, one of the
main mission statement for the World War II Foundation is to provide free education for future generations.
And one of those drives to actually reach newer audiences is providing those stories also in VR. And that's where we come in.
Yeah.
The World War II Foundation was founded by Tim Gray, which you see here on the second from right side, holding the World War II Foundation sign. He comes from news broadcasting and has done more than 30 films. I think it's way above 35 right now. It's hard to count because he's active, and he has to be because a lot of those veterans are not around anymore. So he has a huge library of veteran interviews from all different theater of war. So he has Pacific and he has Europe, and he has certain units like the 101st Airborne Division, which we know from the Band of Brothers. And he also has interviews from the Tuskegee Airmen. And here in the middle, in the blue jacket, we see one of the Tuskegee Airmen. This was last year in February in DC at the Museum of African American History. And this is Harry Stewart, which also plays a role in our VR documentary. Here he is receiving the Bob Hope Award, which the World War II Foundation gives out. And he's, I think, one of 2 pilots that are still alive from the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah, and it is also important that this is his personal story. So during during the award ceremony, not only did Harry Stewart receive the award, it was also the premiere for Return to Ramitali, which was the 2D version of the Tuskegee Airmen.
With a slightly different focus. I will go later in a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
The World War II Foundation not only makes movies, they have the International Museum of World War II in Rhode Island. Anyone can visit. Students get in for free. Classes, if a school class wants to come, they get in for free because it's all about education, and they want to have this as freely available as possible. And they recently, they expanded the location, and they have now also a space for 6 headsets where they actually show all the VR movies that they have about World War II.
Yeah, so not only can you see the films online via YouTube and Oculus TV, it is also great to go into the location and experience the VR experiences, and then also talk to the museum staff to get more additional information about the topic.
And see the artifacts that they have there. So they have not only uniforms and weapons, but they have all kinds of artifacts that you can look through, letters, very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
We have been doing VR documentaries for the World War II Foundation since 2020. The first one we did was Omaha Beach, where we could not go ourselves to film to Europe, unfortunately. But fortunately, Ignacio Ferranto Margili did film for us. We talked with him in between. So he went to Normandy, filmed the beaches for us, and we did the pre-production and post-production on this.
Yeah, which was also very important because this year marked the 80th anniversary of the landing in Normandy.
I think it was all over the news. So if you haven't watched this yet and want to know what it is to be on this beach, go and watch it.
The story follows 3 veterans and their very, very personal stories, what they experienced during that day and how they accomplish what they had to accomplish from 3 different, very different perspectives.
So they were very young. They were 19, 20 years old when they landed on this beach. They had several months of training in the UK, but this was the first time they actually went into battle. And it's very, very emotional. Our second story was about the siege of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, the last attempt of the Germans to change the direction of the war, which of course failed. And the siege of Bastogne talks about that little town and how the 101st Airborne Division, or the Band of Brothers, as you might know, held this town, and that what happened during that time, how they suffered, how they needed to hold out, and how they in the end were relieved by the fourth division.
Yes,
Infantry division.
Yes. And then we come to today's topic, which is the Tuskegee Airmen, VR.
And yeah, we will go more into this in a second. So why VR for docs? I think VR is actually a great medium for documentaries and to learn more about history, not only for students, but for everyone. We usually learn about history. One way we learn about history, of course, is in school. The other one is books, documentaries online, or on streaming, or on the TV. And another way we learn is to go visit places where history happened. And I think this is where VR really excels. We put you into this place. So what we see here is the operations building in Ramitelli in Italy, where the Tuskegee Airmen were stationed from 44 to 45, and where they flew their most famous missions, basically. That's the part where most people know them about. So you can see here, this building is pretty run down, and you see it's the Italian countryside, nothing is here. And it was not different when they were there, basically. When you usually watch a documentary in traditional style, this is what you get. You get a black and white image. You get, which is interesting, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. So what we do is we go to that place, and you can see this hangar is exactly the hangar that we just saw in this picture. So we put you in this place, and besides putting you right there, and you can see this airfield also hasn't changed much since the Tuskegee Airmen have been there. It's still basically those 2 hangars. On the other side, they have a couple more modern airplanes, but these 2 hangars are actually a museum at the moment.
Yeah, so this is actually managed by the National Park Service. So it is a designated landmark.
And then what we do is we combine those two. We put actually the archival footage that we found and film the location where that actually happened, and then combine those two to give you a sense for interconnection to the history then and now. So, you know, this place still exists, which makes things a lot more real than if you're just seeing a black and white picture of it. Okay, so the Tuskegee Airmen. What are the Tuskegee Airmen? Who are the Tuskegee Airmen? Like everyone, you start out putting the term into Google. First thing shows up, Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is great because it gives you a lot of results that lead you to somewhere else, shows you a lot of sources. Wikipedia usually is good with those sources. That's not your only source, of course, can't be, shouldn't be, but it's a good starting point. So the Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American military pilots in the US during World War II.
It came to life from a promise from Truman to Roosevelt to promise the African-American community in America to actually have a participation in the war effort.
So we're talking about the 1930s, 1940s. The US was not in the war yet. And
the US was still very segregated, especially the South.
And the early civil rights groups and African-American newspapers were pushing for equal treatment, like there were decades after that. And as Joergen said, a promise from Roosevelt during election he had to keep, and they got enough pressure on him, so he agreed that there will be African-American military pilots group, but they would not put them together with the other pilots.
Yeah, so the problem was that the pilot in the Army is automatically an officer, and a black officer commanding white corpsmen was unthinkable back then. So the Pentagon was very much trying to figure out, and also sandbagging this internally, to make sure that they are separated. So the solution was to build a completely separate unit of only black people, more or less not in touch with white enlisted people, other than the occasionally flight trainer or something like that.
Yeah, so, and this unit was built in Tuskegee, Alabama. They were one of the worst places it could have been built, because we are now talking deep South, where segregation was several times worse than, say, somewhere up north, New York or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is, and as you see this book on the right side, on the top right, this is a book that came out in the 50s, and that is the first time that the term, the Tuskegee Airmen, is actually used. Before that, they were not known as the Tuskegee Airmen, and
they were just nicknamed the Red Tails.
And the Tuskegee Airmen includes not only the pilots. While we hear most about the pilots, and while our movie is also most about the pilots, there were thousands of people that made this happen. There were in any position that you needed to make this group work, there were people making this work, and it extended to actually surgeons and nurses, which meant those were the first African-American surgeons in the Army.
Yeah. So we talk about flight crew, mechanics, drivers, administrative tasks, medical crew, surgeons, including this, radio operators, anything you can think of to make a plane fly was in this fighter group.
Meteorologists, and one thing our documentary is also not talking about, there was not only a fighter pilot group, there was also a bomb squadron, and unfortunately, it was not possible to include all of this, but they're also meant by Tuskegee Airmen. And also all the white instructors that were there and the white commander are also included as Tuskegee Airmen. So after the first read of Wikipedia, Google, and so on, it needs to get a little bit more serious. So we're going to the National Archives, which I must say is really great for research. It's all free. It's getting more and more online. There's still stuff that is not online, but there are vast documents that made it online by now. And this is basically the search for material. How did it look then for photographs, for videos, and also on the Library of Congress, the same. You can get a lot of material, original material, and you're free to use it. So I'm collecting all this stuff, I'm researching, and the next part of this research basically is putting it all in a lot of spreadsheets. So I made tons of spreadsheets. You see the first spreadsheet just lists what the archival footage is, the name of the file, when did this particular thing that is shown on this photograph or in this video happen, where did it happen, who was involved, the link to it again, and also the content. So I can always go back to see if there's more, use this to find more material, and also make sure that I put it in the correct place in the story later on.
Yeah, this was also important to identify sources that would need to have rights cleared afterwards. For example, the Imperial War Museum in London requires payments for material to be used. The German archives are not free, and it was important to identify exactly where did this came from. Can we use it? Can we not use it? If we really want to use it, where do we need to go to clear the material?
Right. So for each source that I have, and that is the Library of Congress, the National Archives, the Roosevelt Library, and everything, and a lot more, I have a tab for each one of them, and there's tons and tons of material that I list there. And then the second part that I do, the second part that I do is actually research at the same time, research the important dates for the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah, to establish a clear timeline to make sure that we are historically correct in context.
So this is the first part of the story. That's the kind of the background where we will put in the individual stories, but we need to have this first cleared and have this have a good understanding of that.
Yeah. The second part was the extensive library that Tim Gray from the World War II Foundation has created over the last years. All his interviews with veterans over the last 15-ish years or so are all in his library, and we were able to handpick the ones that are relevant.
So I get a number of files, interview files that were filmed in 16:9, a sit-down interview, the regular interview you see in the documentaries, and this is my source for the individual stories.
Yeah. So here it came in handy that Premiere, for example, has a transcription function now that it gets automatically transcripted, and we can easily pick out the sound bites that later build up the story.
So then again, for this, again, spreadsheets. One spreadsheet is just about all the airmen, about their basic data. Where did they come from? Name, when were they born? When did they graduate? The second spreadsheet is where I'm already trying to sort through the topics that they're talking about. What is their background? How did they experience, for example, Pearl Harbor? How do they get to be pilots? And that's a couple of different answers. For example, Pearl Harbor, some of them just felt, as any other American felt, I need to do something, I need to join the army. But at the same time, they were like, I don't want to join the army as most African Americans do, because they were usually put into menial labor jobs. So cooks, road building,
Transportation, latrine digging.
all those stuff was given to the African Americans. They wanted to do more. They wanted to be pilots. Some of them had already contact with some aviation, and they wanted to go that way. So they were hoping that something is going to happen.
Yeah. So some of them were already trained as commercial pilots in the North. Some were just very interested in aviation and wanted to join the efforts. So they had very different motivations why they wanted to join.
And they're also having different backgrounds in the beginning. For example, all the pilots had college degrees. Later on, some of them come right out of high school, and some of them just want to be pilots, and others knew what is happening, what that meant in a historic background, that an African American could be a military pilot, and they knew, and they were working for the double victory that became a slogan during World War II, which meant not only victory about over the Nazis, but also victory at home to being treated equally.
Yeah, and the driving force behind all of this was actually Benjamin O. Davis, who was leading this fighter group specifically, and was fighting through the challenges in the Pentagon constantly.
Yep. Okay, so after we've been through all our archival footage and it is sorted, we go on location. This is Ramitelli.
Yep.
In Italy.
Actually, the main town is Campo Marino in the little state of Molise.
Which doesn't exist.
Apparently to Italians. And we were joined by Chiara, who's a friend from Venice. She joined us in Campo Marino as a translator, as well as a field producer for us.
So we were there during a heat wave, which is, of course, not the best location. So you see us all wear the hats and staying in the shade as much as possible.
Yeah, it was a funny shooting schedule. We tried to shoot like in the early morning hours, trying to wrap at no later than 11 o'clock before noon, and then do secondary shoots later after 4 o'clock.
So Ramitelli, we started with the last station where the Tuskegee Airmen were actually working from. Ramitelli, they got to Ramitelli in 44. Before that, they were in other places in Italy and also in Africa. And it was always a struggle for them because other commanders didn't want to integrate them into their units. They didn't want them. They were they didn't get as much opportunities as other pilots. When they got to Italy, they changed commander and finally had a commander that actually believed in them and treated them just as any other.
Yes. Plus the local population did not treat them like they were treated at home.
They were treated like any other allied troops in this area, and there were a lot. Actually, there were a lot of airports in this area, a lot of stations.
Yeah. So how the airfields in World War II worked is that the Allied country requisited a couple of acres of farmland, put down a metal grids on strategic places that acted up as a soil stabilizer and as a temporary runway. The area around Ramitelli was actually home of 5 air bases. The New Zealanders had one nearby, but this one we were really trying to find the fields where the original runway was, because the idea behind the documentaries that we created for the World War II Foundation to be trying to be as authentic, historically authentic as anyhow possible. So the field is where the planes were parked. The building that you see in the upper left is the headquarters operations buildings that is still standing as it is today. And we discovered this through Google Maps, through talking to the local historian. In the middle, you see Marco Altobello. He wrote a book about the Tuskegee Airmen in Ramitelli, and he also works for the local government. So he was a great resource, showing us around, getting us access to where we needed to, finding the spots that are relevant to this.
Introducing us to people who actually lived at that time. So we were talking with someone who was a little child during the time, who remembered that they brought wine to those air bases and got meat back, because meat is what they didn't have. Wine they had tons of.
Yes,
so
exactly. And we even did little goofy shots, like recreating the pretty famous shot from Benjamin O. Davis looking out to the airfield, and this is the lower right where Uli is standing, and we're kind of mimicking that direction. And you see in the original picture, you see exactly the same hills in the background.
Yeah, you see the Tuskegee Airmen in front, and then with this nice leather jacket and behind. So one of the things that what we always were doing, I had an iPad with me, which had all the footage that I found on it, sorted by location, by style. And for example, we had this building in the background, so we were putting the camera in a place where this building was in the background. So we always were looking at the iPad and then putting the camera in the right location, so we got the right perspective with the image that we had from the archives.
Yeah, talking about the runways, because they don't exist anymore. They are now tomato fields, wine vineyards, etc. We were trying to capture as many spots that would help us later in the story to tell, like, where are the planes parked, where were the runways, etc. So we overshot a little bit here. I think we did 30-ish static videos, just walking around on those fields, trying to capture like every possible angle that is historically relevant. The building inside on the upper right is because the roof has collapsed over time and is not maintained. You see lots of shrubbery inside, but we're trying to find the briefing room that is left over, that you see then later in the VR, because there are pictures later that exist from inside the briefing room. We're trying to recreate that shot, like how does this fit into this building? This, of course, involved crawling around in questionable areas. We did some shots also on the second floor. And since the first floor roof has already collapsed partially, this was like pretty sketchy, and we limited the amount of people that go. Actually,
that means Joergen went up there.
Just me went up there to make sure that we don't lose too much personnel.
So Ramitelli is very significant in the Tuskegee Airmen story, because this is when they started to escort bombers that were flying to strategic locations to bomb, for example, oil refineries for the Germans. So they wanted to cut off the energy that the Germans could use. They were bombing train stations, other industry, and they also flew those escorts to Berlin, where the bombers then attacked, distracting while the other armies came across the Rhine.
Yeah. So the significance here is that the bombers had problems with the German Luftwaffe, that the bombers were picked out, but Luftwaffe had very little defense going to their targets. Escort missions before that were not completely successful, and the bombers had a pretty high attrition rate.
it's not a very glamorous mission for a fighter pilot to escort a bomber, basically. So the interest of that is lower on the fighter pilot's side.
So what Benjamin O. Davis did in this context was to really drive home the main mission of what those escort missions is. That is protecting the bombers, staying with them, and being actually very successful in this context.
Our second location that we went to is actually Tuskegee, Alabama. And there are two airports, the one that we mentioned earlier already, Morton Airfield, that you see in the middle top. And then the other airfield, which is Sharp Airfield, where the more advanced training happened, where then also the base was, the real base was built around.
Yeah.
And you see this on the left side, on the middle right side as well. This is the other airfield.
Yeah. So Sharp Airfield is has been decommissioned after the war, has been sold. It's private property. The runway still exists. Every building is torn down, but we were still able to find the locations that we believe were relevant to where the original buildings were. And we also found this very dinky little tower here that was another sketchy place to climb up to, of course.
So we, besides the two airfields, we also went to Tuskegee Institute or Tuskegee University, which was called Tuskegee Institute during the 1940s. It's famous for a second thing that we're not talking about today, the syphilis study. But it was also the home for the classroom training for the Tuskegee Airmen. So they learned the first intro to navigation, to airplane
just flying. In
yeah,
general.
flying.
Yes.
They learned at the Tuskegee Institute, and Tuskegee Institute then had their initial flight training at the Morton Airfield.
Yeah. Another important story was also how the pilots and every crew arrived in Tuskegee. It was the train station. We believe we found the original train station, which was also just a temporary structure during the war, and were able to match the historic footage that we found with the actual train tracks, how they exist today.
So the arriving actually in Tuskegee, or before they even arrived in Tuskegee, a lot of the pilots that came from the north took the train down, and then at the Mason-Dixon line, they were told, you have to move now to the front of the train, which was the car that had where all the smoke would blow into.
Yeah, it's the dirtiest, most unpleasant train car, and of course
that was the segregation. Because of segregation, they had to move into that car, and that was the car designated to them. So that was the first intro to we're going somewhere new, and then they were relying on other pilots, other cadets to tell them what not to do to stay safe, because they were in the deep south, and the people around there in the town were not so happy to have them there.
Yeah. But you also see the camera technique that we used here. In the middle, you see the Meta 3 camera, which is a lovely camera that we have for VR. And but we use also a variety of other cameras in this context.
Yep.
The next very important part of the story is, of course, the plane that the Red Tails flew.
So the plane that the Red Tails get famous for is the North American Mustang P-51. They got that plane in the middle of 1944, July 1944. They were upgraded to this newer plane, which was much faster and could reach further. That was top of the line for the US. The US didn't have jet planes. The Luftwaffe already had jet planes, so it was good to get faster, but it was still slightly behind technologically.
Yeah, but it allowed also the Red Tails to stay with the bombers and not get distracted by the Luftwaffe attacks.
It also, and the other thing, because they had a longer reach, or wider reach, they could go to missions that were further away.
Yeah.
For really far away missions, they would put a tank under
They
the
had actually 2 tanks under the wings.
under
for
the
that.
wings, and that allowed them to fly to Berlin for this one mission that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So we were able to contact the Commemorative Air Force in Dallas, who actually has a P-51. And this was a trainer plane that was never in the war. It was here in the US. It was to be scrapped, and then CAF was able to acquire it and restore it back to flying conditions.
Yeah, I think they had to cut the wings off to transport it, actually. So
Yeah, so somebody chopped the wings off just to get it on a trailer, just to
but
get
it is they can fly it again, so it's all safe. I was on the plane for a little loop, so unfortunately I could not be on the plane when our pilot did the aerobatics, which I would have loved. But I was on the plane for a little bit just to make sure we get our audio recording, which was also something we wanted to be authentic with. So we got the audio recording on the plane and from the ground, and that is used throughout our documentary.
Yeah, so we filmed the inside of the cockpit in 360 right in front of our pilot, Doug Rosendahl. But we also put 3 cameras on the outside of the plane, and you see it. We put one on the tail. We had one at the wing base. So we see, and this was a great shot that you see in the documentary where the wings fold right after takeoff, where the wings fold in again. And then the opening shot is out on the wing itself.
So on the very tip of the wing, basically.
Yeah. Just to show how this plane flies, and it allows us to give us a very great experience with this. We did, after all the flying, we did beauty shots of the P-51, and for the beauty shots, we definitely had to clean the plane, which was fun and necessary. But in 360, we filmed the planes from every possible angle that we saw in historical pictures, because the Tuskegee Airmen had media during World War II that were visiting them due to their significance in the political context. And so we filmed it basically on every angle, cut them out later, masked them out, so we were able to put them actually onto the fields that we filmed in Ramitelli, and then overlay the historical videos and photos that we found in this context. So this was a very important step to get the plane from every angle.
Yep. Okay, so after all the shooting, we're coming home, and I'm constructing the timeline. So this is an almost finished timeline. It's not completely finished. You see there is, I think, about 30 audio tracks and probably about 15, 20 video tracks. There are already 12, there are 12 tracks just for the veterans audio. There is 1 track for our narrator, which was still necessary because I wanted to tell the whole story, but not every piece of the story was mentioned by the veterans in the interview, also due to the interview questions, which we didn't have any influence in. And then there is, below all that, there is tons of airplane sounds, ambience, people sounds, walking, marching.
Mechanical sounds,
So,
everything that belongs to an airplane or related to this.
So that was the base for the soundscape. And then for the video tracks, we have our basic 360 video track, the things that we filmed. And then above that comes the archival video. We also tried, because we're in 360, we also try to fill the frame sometimes, where we have several things you can look around for the archival footage. And so there's photographs and videos of archival footage is on top of that. So that's why you see that many layers and a couple of adjustment layers. And I think Joergen will talk now about
Yeah.
how we
So
did-
the important part here is to have a very set structure, how the timeline is constructed. So we see a lot of subsequences here that are used, but mostly if Uli is editing it, she's closing the file. I open the Premiere file on my machine to do VFX here. And so it is very important that everything is very clearly placed where it's supposed to be and not just willy-nilly smacked
and
somewhere.
also labeled, very clearly labeled. And then I use an empty track sometimes just to separate stuff for easier visibility. And then of course color as well tells me what kind of track is that, or sometimes I use color to say we already worked on this piece and it is done. So color is also a very important part here. And yeah, then we get something that looks like this. We have a 360 background from Ramitelli. We have an airplane that we shot in Dallas, Texas on the airfield. And on top of that is the archival footage. That's actually a video with the Tuskegee Airmen in Ramitelli. And you see a little bit how the ground looked like, the metal grid that Joergen mentioned before that.
Yep.
So Joergen is now going to talk a little bit about how we constructed that.
As we have mentioned, there is tons of historic film footage that has been
a chemistry
digitized.
A shoe salesman must learn how to fly.
And some of them were staged, some of them were in situ. They all are interesting. They have sometimes camera pans in there, but they're shaky. It's 16mm film. Camera tracking was not utterly perfect. So here you can see how the background image is
Shoe salesman must learn how to
interesting. Let's put it this way.
And also, just to mention it, the first person here on the walking in is actually Benjamin Davis, the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah, so this is why the camera lingers on him. So in order to put this into context, we took a shot,
a chemistry student,
from we took this archival footage and put it actually into After Effects. And this is a tracking stamp that we developed since we did the Omaha Beach footage, where I'm trying to put the camera pan into a wider sense.
Basically, a static 360 presents this camera pan.
Yeah, so you see how the background object now kind of like stays where it is in space, but our camera window moves. This requires often a hopscotch tracking because elements go out of frame. Most of the time I'm using a single point on a building to do an XY tracking on it. And once that is lost, I hopscotch to another thing. That's why you see the multiple layers below in After Effects. Once this comp is done, we drop it into a sequence in Premiere again. And here we're using a onion skinning effect where we underlay copies of the tracked video in order to fill the frame. So the image that the scan that we did before is not really lost, but it helps us getting this into context. This sequence is then put into the main timeline, and it tracks into the full 360. So this is a classic plane to sphere that you see me scrubbing through here, and it stays into place. Here we basically find the spot on the Sharp airfield where we believe the building was, or
it makes sense.
It kind of looks like this because it was like this. But you see also the integration into the colorful 360 in the background, and then we use a grayscale mask around it to have a transition between today and yesterday. And we felt like this was a very important design element that we used for all three of our documentaries. This is what I would call the reverse Ken Burns pan and scan effect. And we use it throughout our VR documentaries, and it has been very successful in this context. The historic clips need all different treatments, so one tracking method may not work for the next one. Sometimes it is a lot of manual work.
And in addition to that, we also put everything through Topaz Video AI to improve resolution and improve clarity. And again, every clip is different, so it will take different approaches.
So there are hundreds of those clips in the documentary, and it was a very rewarding project in this context.
Besides that, I mentioned earlier that the Tuskegee Airmen were stationed in Africa, Morocco for a while, and I was very happy to find actually color footage of Morocco, and I'm like, yay! And then the question was, okay, I don't have a background. We can't go to Africa and film there.
There's no production budget to fly to Africa.
Not for one shot anyway. So that is where Chiara comes in again. And some of you may know that she is drawing equirectangular footage. So she has done this now for us for all three films, where we ask her to fill in the things that we don't have. So here we didn't have a background, and you see how she matched it up with the mountains that we had in there, also with the figures, the size, and the ground, and put those two, which were probably not in the same location, but we wanted to give an idea how it looked in Africa and tell the story that happened there.
Yes, and then we found also another little clip of a plane taking off, quite possibly in Africa, and put it also into context. So you just, what you see in the little gray insert in the center. So Chiara's work has been very, very helpful in this context. We used it extensively for the Bastogne project. Here for the Tuskegee, we were lucky to have the majority of the material because we had way more time for pre-planning to shoot more material in there. So the Africa is just a side story.
So then besides all the visual parts that we get, we have a custom score on this for this documentary by Adonis Tsilimbaris, with whom we worked for a couple of projects already. We love working with him. He understands what we say and brings back what I need. So I tell him, I want this kind of mood here, this kind of music over there. And he comes back with something. I say, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't, or here I need something different. And he actually, very few rounds, we really understand each other with what is needed in that particular place. And then the other part is, of course, creating the full soundscape and the full sound mix, which includes all the veterans, of course. We have done this with Mona Lisa Studios in Long Island City, and especially with Denise Barbarita, where we have done tons of projects with her already.
Yes.
So also
she's normally known for her music mixing, and she won 2 Grammys so far for her work on there, but it's also fun to work with her on a film score. And
of course, there were a lot of people that you don't see here. We talked with a lot of people that helped us. For example, with the Tuskegee University, we got access to classrooms. They made it happen just in between classes. They held back a class for us, so we could go in there for a couple of minutes, film what we needed, and we're out again. So the whole class and the instructor were waiting for us to film that. That was very, very nice. And
same as the Tuskegee Airport. They allowed us onto their runways and film actually the spaces where the first training actually happened.
during that event that we went to in DC at the Museum of African American History. We met people that gave us pointers with look here, look there, ask those questions. So a lot of people that we said thank you to in the at the end of the documentary were involved with this. And of course, we already, we submitted it to a couple of film festivals and we got great response so far.
Yeah,
for that.
so we're very happy that it won NIFA this year, and it was also selected for the Roma Film Festival. And as Uli said, we're very looking forward that more film festivals are able to recognize it. If you have questions, visit the WWII if you feel like that you want to support their mission and would like to make a chunky donation so they can produce more 360 VRs, please visit the website, talk to them. They're more than happy to.
But all the material is free to watch. You don't need to donate. They have an app. You can watch it basically everywhere.
Yep, you can go to Oculus TV, go into the history section, you'll find the VRs there. You find it on YouTube and also on our website at Koncept VR.
So, thank you for listening.
This has been fascinating. I think many of us have done 360 video, but nowhere near at the level of what you are doing. Everything that you had to go through was something else. If you like, you can open up the chat and the questions on your monitor, and you'll see some of the questions that have been asked. I'm going to make one observation and question to begin with. 360 video, like what you produce, has always been sort of a challenge for me in terms of, well, how do you make sure that the viewer is looking at the important section as opposed to it being behind them and never seen it? And when I watched it on YouTube, I had that kind of experience where I was just kind of wildly panning around, making sure I didn't miss anything. Then I viewed it in the headset and it all came together. So maybe you can describe, how you guys approached that. How do you get people to look at what you want them to look at?
It is a collaborative process between Uli and me, where we do have our 12 years of experience seeing and feeling 360s, and then using little tricks in the edits of where do we want the user to look at in important moments, but also give the viewer the freedom to explore. So the fear of missing out in a headset does not become a point of hindrance. We want them to look around. We want them to explore. We do not want them to get a feeling they're missing, and they can always come back.
So it's a question a little bit about density, information density. If there's a really important point where we want you really to only look in one direction, we will not put anything else around it. So you will look for that part. You will automatically look at that part. We also always define a forward direction for us, which is the story direction, but add then the side stories, secondary stories to that. And as I said, as Jan already mentioned, it is sometimes not as important that you see the forward direction. And if it is important, we make sure through reducing what's around it to get you to the forward direction.
Yeah, from a technical perspective, we do maintain the forward in the exact center of the timeline frame.
So that's
Always.
when you have the headset on, you know where you go back to, because you keep the sense of where you started off, so that that is automatic. With YouTube, it's a little bit more tricky, but again, you can restart anytime YouTube and go over it again.
That was the revelation to me, was that when I put the headset on, I'm in my seat, I'm facing a direction, that is forward, and that will always be in your video the primary direction when there's something important, which
Yeah.
didn't come across in the YouTube, but it sort of shows why the headset viewing adds so much to the experience. Okay, if I can, let's see, there's a couple questions here. Do you use smaller prosumer cameras in difficult small spaces? When doing static images, do you prefer to do 360 photos, pro photos?
So we use a number of different cameras as we, for example, for the shoot of the P51. Of course, we couldn't put large cameras on the outside, so those are Insta360 X2, I think, at that time.
Or X3.
And so they are on the outside. Inside the cockpit, we have the QCam 8K. Also not the largest camera because just of the small space, it will not stitch. This was a very difficult part, actually.
So there was like extensive stabilization and reconstruction things where I actually had to reconstruct the window beams that are on the side because they were like totally broken and it didn't feel like okay to keep them in there. P51 is also not necessarily known to be the smoothest ride. So it is loud and shaky and vibrates.
Oh, yeah.
So there were like tons of phases that we need to go through stabilization with different things. But all the ground shots were all shot on the Meta 3. Camera is video because we feel like that shooting video, even if it appears to be a static scene, there is still stuff happening in the background that give you the feeling of being there. The only exception that we had here were where Willy Kamena gracefully donated 2 panoramas from Washington, D.C., so we can illustrate the stories, what was happening at the Pentagon, what was happening in Washington in there. So those are static 360 photos.
Okay. If anyone else wants to ask a question of the participants or the panelists, please, jump in. All right, I'm going to ask a question then. Festivals. Is it a matter of the festivals have specific VR or 360 VR video sections, or how does that work? Because of course your medium is so much different than traditional film.
Yeah.
So the main platform that we use is Film Freeway, which collects almost all of the festivals that are out there.
And they usually, you can look to the, yes, we are submitting to the VR 360 festivals or festivals that include it. So there are a couple of festivals that are exclusively VR, which is Fivers, for example, which I think is one of the greatest in that regard because it has a really good selection and a variety of things you can see there. And then sometimes it feels more like an add-on for the festival to appear there. So you need to choose what's there. And then of course there's just online festivals, all kinds of different stuff there. So yeah, we're looking for the ones that support VR in 360.
Yeah, but we're also looking for the documentary category, shorts, as well as social justice.
Yep.
Yes.
So you need to pick the ones that fit your project.
And then set yourself a quarterly budget in how much money you would like to spend.
Submitting to those.
Yes. Festivals can range from $5 submissions to $500 submissions.
Okay. Let's see.
I've got a question.
Please.
Kind of a follow-up to we were talking about the cameras and hardware, and you don't have to be specific about what you're doing. I'm mostly looking at the workflow, the overall workflow, because we'll have people that will watch this video, they'll be really inspired like I am, you know, and they'll want to go out and get the tools. You mentioned the cameras, and again, that it changes so fast. There's no need to say a specific camera, but what's the rest of the workflow as far as software? I saw Adobe Premiere Pro for doing video and After Effects for doing some special, processing. Can you explain just really high level the workflow, just kind of where we're at now, maybe even, naming software?
Yep. So the main workflow is our main camera, the Meta 3, films as ProRes movie files, which is super convenient in this context because it's not a raw file that I need to convert in a OEM software. Goes into Mystica VR, and we create preview files, usually 4K, that we can then drop into the timeline and work on the edits. This can take a while until the edits is kind of established. Once I basically get a green light from Uli that a certain scene or a certain take is good to go, I get the time codes for that specific scene, and I go into Mystica and do a fine stitch. Fine stitch then gets rendered out.
Use PTGUI.
So that's PTGUI and Mystica VR to render it out. Then we go into, currently for this project we did After Effects, but some shots we did in DaVinci Resolve. Do the nadir cleanup, camera shadow removal, moving branches that are overhead that want to be cleaned up, etc. And this is what we call the phase 2 stitch, then gets rendered out as a progress, again in full resolution. And once we have basically all the timelines established, she swaps out the
Low res.
the low res to the high res versions, and this is where sequences or subsequences come in very handy.
Yeah, so it's easier to edit with the lower res, like a proxy file, but I'm actually not creating, most of the time I'm not even creating proxy files. We have the low res previews and then swap in the higher reses that are only for this particular part that we really need.
Yeah. Sometimes if I want to do for certain projects, want to an elaborate process, I recreate the Premiere timeline in DaVinci and do a color pass on all of them to make sure that they match to each other, because we have vastly different cameras, and matching a QCam to the Meta 3 is a challenge due to the vastly different color spaces that they use, but we will try to put it together as coherent as possible. Sometimes for this one, I think I did the color passes inside of Premiere, because we're mostly static shots in there. So that was still very, very easy in this context.
And the graphics that we use usually are done in, what was it, Illustrator?
Yeah, just ping files that we import.
Yeah, they're not, and then they're getting a plane to sphere effect applied, so they look correct in.
Yeah, some shots need extensive repairs, especially the ones that we shot on the plane, that were mounted to the plane. So I spent a great deal in After Effects and Mocha to track and stabilize.
Okay, excellent description of the workflow. Thank you. I will also want to comment your timeline. It was beautiful. I could see myself putting that up as a poster. I'm an organization nut myself, and you said it throughout your presentation that keeping track of all of those assets, you really have to be, very, very methodical about it. What's the machine? You might have answered the question because you're running proxy videos. You can't be handling all those assets in their raw form. So you're doing all of your editing and artwork and then a final swap out. What's the machine that you're running this on, or maybe what's the machine that a person entering this could expect to not be bogged down and
because we're working with 2 people at the moment on those files. All assets, all videos live on a NAS drive that is on a 10 gig E network and is delivering a chunky 1 gigabyte per second consistently up and down.
We have, at the moment, we have 380. So NVIDIA GPUs 3080, which were the last time we updated. So we don't do it every year, obviously. Those things are expensive. So we are working on 3080s and multi-CPU machines.
Yeah, Ryzen and Threadripper at the moment.
Threadripper, that's a nice one.
Yeah, it's nice and warm at the moment.
It is really warm.
I have one as well, and I'm having cooling problems. We can talk about that maybe offline. And I'll stop it there. I have another question, but I'll let some of the other panelists, or if somebody else out in the audience has a question.
From Daniel, you knew what scenes to record previously, so before shooting, you already had a sense of the story, question mark? I think that has to do with all your pre-production and how meticulous it was before you ever started.
Yeah, so yes, we have a sense of the story. It will not stay that story, but we have a sense of the story. As Joergen said, we're overshooting because the story might change. I need a different shot in there, and we have more archival footage than what we will end up there, of course.
It is important.
If we're lucky.
Yes.
Sometimes we're not that lucky. There is nothing archival that we can use, but
it is important to have a very keen sense on what original archive material you have, to visualize in the field and remember, like, this is roughly what we need, and then very methodically go around and yes, we need this angle, and this angle from the plane. So that's why we shot the plane in, I think, 12 different directions, because this is roughly the angles that we encountered that were used in the photographs.
But in general, we're also open to what we find on the ground. So information we get from people on the ground. From when we were in Italy, we were talking to people. When we get new information, that will also be incorporated. I think it's the same as you say with any movie, that there are 3 stories when you create it, one in pre, one while you're shooting, and then one in post-production. So yes, there needs to be a sense of the story, and there needs to be a sense, I need to know the history, and I need to know what the veterans are talking about when we're going out shooting. But we take the influence we get when anyone tells us a new piece of information, we put that in, and then maybe during post-production there is another piece of information that comes in, or something doesn't feel right, and also try to get some people to review and give you feedback is very important.
Yeah.
People who know what they're talking about and who can be honest about it is. But
it is the magic of the editor that tells the coherent story, that really draws the viewer through it, keeps them attached to the story and interested.
Yeah, but so the VO is only written in the post-production. I don't think I wrote a piece of VO before that, just because it didn't make sense to have that yet.
Well, we do occasionally do a scratch VO. In the beginning, I was recording scratch VO just to see how it flows in the story. Sometimes we use just an AI voice just to see if the story flows correctly, and if I'm sick of hearing myself.
There were several questions having to do with matching of the archival imagery with the 360.
Yep.
Because of course the archival is there beforehand, and the 360 you get while you are shooting, but you can't change it after you have shot and are back in the editing suite. Do you take a photo and hold it up and adjust your position of where you're standing? How do you do this?
It's all in my head.
Well, we have the iPad and we have the footage, and then it's Joergen's head who does the computation.
I do the matching in the field.
We have a question about the mounting of the cameras to the wing, talking about magnets, and can you just quickly explain how you mounted on a historical asset like that?
Cameras were mounted with our vector mount system. That is a race car mounting system that my company produces. We went straight into the fuselage with this. So the tail camera and the wing camera were held down with an M4 screw or a number 8 screw. So we took out one of the original screws and just replaced it with our mount.
Okay. You mentioned AI, so I'm going to kind of throw it out there that one of the I've done some historical projects and the story. We keep talking about the story, and that's been the hardest thing for me is to get that Ken Burns, or really not Ken Burns, but his author, the writer David McCullough, who writes that, who weaves it all together. And you mentioned AI, and AI currently seems to be a loophole in plagiarism and copyright laws. But have you played around with using AI to create scripts yet? To can it search out what known assets there are, like what pictures and video, and could it then see the intersection of that with existing documentation? And do you see that you can have AI actually craft story, or the narrative, or the copy, I guess is what we would call it, for putting in a documentary?
No,
No?
No.
strictly no. The only use of AI was the transcribing feature.
And
You-
the video and picture feature.
makes
I'm
me
not
sad.
trusting AI yet to be historically correct. So that is, I might throw a sentence in because I want it reformulated. Like I just give it like, hey, can you give me a different version of this sentence because it just doesn't sound right to me. That's it.
Okay, and that's maybe that you gave me a little bit of hope there at the end, because I'm an engineer, so I've been trained to do technical writing, and I consider myself to be a decent writer, but it is not a story. It's not the same thing. And so I'm wondering, can I eventually, I mean, I guess what you're saying is you really have to hire that art, which is a writer, a person who can take it and write an engaging narrative and copy. You really can't, you don't see that AI replacing that anytime soon, that creativity. Okay.
No,
Makes sense.
I mean, if you do, you end up with projects like the Toys R Us video that just popped up yesterday.
Yes, I have seen that. Which, yeah, it has that. It kind of like a mishmash or a smeared something is kind of my feeling. It didn't have. I didn't know where we were going. It didn't really have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just
It's
didn't
the
have.
same as in music, where I saw a video the other day where he put up 5 and 5 music clips. 5 were AI generated, 5 were from humans created, and he had problems differentiating like which ones were the AIs, but friends that he showed those videos to were clearly like, yeah, those 5 are AIs because there's something weird in the voice.
Okay.
So we
I
will
guess
still see
one
this.
last question on one last question on AI is that you're using Adobe Premiere Pro. Are you playing around at all with the beta, which has incorporated AI into it? And I could see AI might be helping you on the timeline and managing assets, that's something it could do and not get into trouble.
Yeah, at the moment we're inching a little bit more towards DaVinci,
Okay.
due to the fact that Adobe is not very interested in 360 anymore, and gives us no sign or indication that there ever will be in the near future. While DaVinci has a incredible rich tool set.
And the cost is hard to beat.
And they just brought out a camera, so maybe that translates into some software as well.
Okay. Well, Scott?
Let's see if there's anyone else.
It was
I have a
awesome.
question or, yeah. I have to tell you, I've seen the film twice. I'm going to have to watch it a couple more times because it really is dense in information that is portrayed. 18 minutes flies by real fast.
Good.
Any next projects coming up that we could look forward to?
We
about?
are planning another trip for World Vision at the moment to Kenya, to talk about improvements within their projects.
Right, very nice. That's going to be a fun trip. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the IVRPA website in probably several days, and all participants will get a notice of that. So that if you're an IVRPA member, you can review it again. Or if you weren't able to see the whole thing, you can see the whole thing. Our next webinar, actually, Lauren, you've worked with our next webinar presenter fair amount. Could you just describe what they are going to be presenting?
This is the One Ocean, right?
Yes.
The One Ocean Abu Dhabi is a park, part of SeaWorld, and which Michael Boudet and Terry, oh, what was his last name? Anyways, Terry from Givney Freeman Films in Laguna Beach. They worked on this project in which there is a lot of 360 video, all kinds of video, still images and special effects that went into this project. And it's something, the Sphere in Las Vegas is nice, but it doesn't compare to the One Ocean in Abu Dhabi.
It's a very immersive experience, both in video, sound, special physical effects. For instance, when they've got all these micro drones that come out of the ceiling with little LED lights on them, so they look like fireflies flying all around. They went all around the world shooting this. They built very expensive custom camera rigs to be able to do the underwater as well as overwater views. It's an awesome experience, and very much looking forward to what they had to go through in order to build this entire 360 video presentation.
The numbers that they generated, to the specifications and what have you that they generated is just a mind blower.
And 10 years from now, it'll be what we all do with our phones. So,
Yeah.
Okay, Uli, Joergen, thank you very much for an insight into how you produce this extraordinary 360 video. I definitely appreciate your being here.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yes.